critique is an utterly necessary part of many aspects of human endeavor. Science, for sure. Art as well. It looks a little bit different in general in art. But anyone who has taken, for instance, studio art classes understands the value and the necessary place of critique in assessing even something like art, which might be understood to be, sometimes representational, but even so, there is obviously interpretation involved.
All right, I want to stop here. So I have said that very often we have a term in which there's the legitimate version of something and the malignant version. Mm-hmm. And there's a question about whether we should be saying, I think critique is one of the most useful things in the universe. Very hard to come by because in general, people have perverse incentives. Even people who are on your team may not want to give you honest feedback because they don't want to hurt your feelings or it may complicate your relationship. And so getting honest feedback is fantastic. It's the thing that allows you to navigate and improve.
But it's tough. It's tough
rare
to deliver and it's tough to receive.
Right.
If it's negative.
Yeah. Nobody likes delivering critique to somebody that they value. Right. So it's an important but rare phenomenon in the universe. And it is different from criticism, which can be motivated by all kinds of things. Right. So maybe critique is a version of criticism. It's an honorable exploration of what might be changed or improved or what isn't right, mm-hmm. rather than just simply the allegation that something isn't right, which may or may not be well-founded. Is that fair?
Yeah, no, I think that is fair. I think some forms of critique are more common in some cultures than others. And I think it also may be gendered. In fact, I'm certain that it is. So with regard to cultures, I think, for instance, somewhat stereotypically but accurately, the Jewish dinner table tends to be one in which there's talking over one another and there's disagreement, and it's often very lively. And none of that disagreement, which sometimes is critique, is imagined to be about hatefulness or discouragement of thinking into areas where you might be wrong or more capable of making errors than in others, right? It's exactly about in being in service of both the family dynamic and community and also truth.
Right. And I'm hesitant here because I don't have a lot of experience with Japanese culture, but the reputation of Japanese culture is that the critique is delivered so subtly that one has to read deeply in order to get it. It's not that it isn't there, right. but the point is your calibration has to be very different, right? Because if you're expecting for somebody to just say flat out, hey, this is what you did wrong and here's what you might do, and somebody is really, if it's written between the lines or something like that, you may have to go after it in order to even get the value of it.
And of course, if in your home culture, you will be expected to understand exactly the form that the critique comes in and be either unable to detect or flabbergasted by the directness of critique that may come at you, depending on which end of the spectrum your home culture happened to have. And I would say that we also know this. Cultural differences are different from sex differences because every single culture has both sexes and always has. And so this is one of the many reasons that the kinds of isms that people talk about are not simply of a type, right? That sexism and sex differences are very different than, say, racism and possible race differences. But something that I have been thinking about a lot of late, and I've begun to talk about a little bit in some of the very many interviews we've been doing about the book, is the differences in male and female strategies with regard to establishing and maintaining dominance. That we all need, because we are now living in a world, thankfully, gratefully, in which men and women can interact as, on a par, as equals in the intellectual space. But pretending that we don't have differences that are more ancient than that ability is a fool's errand. And in general, across species that have them, and certainly across human cultures in time and space, we see that dominance hierarchies in males are typically created and maintained by rather overt mechanisms, and in the form of critique that would be being really direct. saying very directly, actually, no, I think you're wrong. Here's why. And female dominance hierarchies, both in other species and in humans throughout time and space, are much more likely to be covert in nature, and so use more subtlety, more nuance, sometimes going around, skirting the actual person with whom you might have a critique and talking to someone else about it. And on these topics, I have much more to say, I am not making value judgment here. I am observing what we know to be true. But this is part of the reason that men and women coming together into sort of professional spaces often have problems. That the nature of how we expect, on average, population level differences, critique to come, and how it feels to a woman, say, if someone is very direct, or to a man if someone is really not direct. A man is less likely to hear the critique, and that's not necessarily because he's being daft. It may be because that's really not the culture that he comes from. And a woman may be more likely to feel attacked by a direct critique, even if attack was never the intention nor the desire of the person giving it. So recognizing the many types of ways that critique occurs, even in good faith environments, I think is valuable.
Yes, and there is, I quite like the point you make about the differences between male and female being of a fundamentally different kind than the differences between people from different cultures, right? To the extent that you're correct, and I think you are correct, that female kinds of jockeying involve more covert mechanisms. At the point that we start intermingling in a space where high quality critique is extremely valuable, it may be misread. In other words, it may be understood to not be literal, but to be, a subtle attempt to undermine or something like that. And that's a recipe for disaster, right? Absolutely. You're either in an environment where critique is understood to be highly valuable, or it's a weaponized environment where critique is used to destabilize someone. And you've got to know which one of those you're in order to even interpret what you're hearing.
True. So a person could hear what you just said and map on those two things to male female, and I would say that's absolutely not correct. And I don't think that's what you meant to say, that the idea that critique as weaponization is a female way of going about things. That
would be a covert mechanism.
Yes, but it's one of very many.
Right.
It's hardly true that the ways that women engage in critique is inherently weaponized.
No, I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is that if you are going to avail yourself of covert mechanisms for jockeying, then critique that is not what it appears to be is one. Yeah. And in an environment, let's say a scientific environment, it's one thing between labs, but within lab, for example, you want to have very high quality critique coming from people who in the end have an interest in you succeeding. And
frankly, that is direct. And in fact, so I haven't talked about it extensively because it's not out yet, but I've got a scientific article coming out on exactly this, as you know, that's been sort of in press forever. Exactly positing that we, in fact, in some situations that have been traditionally male, like science, like business, the more male typical style of critique, which is overt, is likely to be the one that we need to default to. So that I'll just asterisk that, and we'll come back to it once that paper is out and I can share it.